Well, hello. How the devil are you? I'm feeling fine. I'm fine. My eye has not been fine, but I'm feeling fine now. And I hope you're fine and that you are going to be interested to hear about this. So, let's talk about it. Hi. Good grief, what's going on here? So, welcome. This is going to be a sort of ad hoc discussion of my live system as it is in its current state, which is most certainly not finished, though it's interesting to discuss it in its non-finished state because I can talk more about what it doesn't do, and then hopefully that will might give you some ideas. Perhaps you can give me some suggestions, as then I will obviously update you when it does do those things, if I can make it do that. This is all coming on the heels of this live performance I did at Ambience Chasers, and the brief for that is ambient. It's a really nice night down in London where literally it is ambient music. There's lots of modular artists. Moon Gangs have played. This guy's lovely, does some amazing stuff, although I'm not sure if he uses modular. But there have been other modular artists. And so I was invited to play, and it felt like quite a low, that's a kind of low fear sort of situation. Ambience, you know, although I'm not an ambient musician, I literally, this is how much of a child I am. I'm like, oh, there's less, you know, we can just have more reverb and just be more chill, and there's less pressure then, because what isn't is a dance gig. I am trying to do this improvised thing. I don't have a script for my performance like Mr. Ebsidic does. There is no script. It's just a system, and I've got to just try and make music work on a moment-to-moment basis and just feel it out. And as I said in the video and before, it's a scary thing because you just don't necessarily know where you're going to go. But I want to sort of talk a bit about the system, show you how it works, show you what's good about it at the moment, what's not good about it, what I was thinking while I was doing the gig, and just other thoughts. And I think the place to start is with what I think contributed to the success of that gig. And there is just one word. I've not had a lot of time this month because of my health, but I have had some time, and I've made sure I use that time to practice this. And that involved wiring this in, but I had an idea of what I wanted to do. But the main thing, obvious as it is practice. You have got to just practice playing with your system over and over and over again. And I'm not certainly the first person to say that. And I think the first person who said it really well was Stevie O, where he said, you know it backwards, because all that practice is going to give you is the confidence that when you walk on stage, especially if you don't have a plan, i.e. you're doing an improvised thing, you just will know as a fact that you won't fail. That you've always, by practicing, I discovered all of these little tricks that I could do with the system that I just made. I discovered, for example, that if I had, rings with full brightness and dampening, it just does this wonderful drone. And I ran it through the Wasp filter, which I've dedicated to that purpose. And it's making a beautiful sound, which is a harmonic of the core sequencer. I'll talk about the tuning in a sec. And just discovering that and just thinking, do you know what? I'm just going to leave rings doing that because it will give me this drone that I can sort of use as a kind of opener and a closer to the set. That'll be a really nice counterpoint. And that just being an example of something done through practice. Another one, for example, being that when I was playing with the 808 and applying delay to it, because I've got the Rainmaker going on here, and the Verb, just enjoying the sound of the 808 with just a load of kind of trippy time delay on it, and just thinking, that's nice. It's nice to not have any melodies on it. So I always know that if I'm kind of getting a bit bored of, I can't find a good riff, I could just fade everything out and just have a bit of a kind of pure drums moment. And so it's those things, knowing that sounds nice, that sounds nice, that sounds nice. It builds up this library. And when I sat down to play the gig, I really didn't feel nervous. I genuinely was in a calm, sort of, happy place. And it's possibly partly because people weren't paying for the gig. It was a free gig. So, I felt less responsibility from that regard. And it's ambient. And this is just one thing I want to say is what I am scared about is the dance thing. Because it's the beauty of ambient music is it's okay to have time to breathe and reflect and have a still moment and just listen to the sound of rings with some delay. But you can't do that in a dancey situation. There is a kind of energy that has to be kept up. And that's really the challenge, I think, is can I, this certainly works for that. And I put the Rainmaker in as a direct response to watching Light Bath videos where he uses rings and Rainmaker. I was like, fuck, I've got to put rings and Rainmaker in this case for that reason. And so I did, and it really does work. But will I leave them in? Probably. I'll probably leave the Rainmaker at least for as long as I can, because that unit really ties the room together. And I can talk a bit about that. But effects, there's a lot to talk about, but effects, having both reverb and delay. I have this Mackie mixer because it has 2 aux sends, and I think it's essential that you have those 2 effects. I think you've got to have delay because delay knits together all those elements. Having just a little dry sound like this, which is Platts and the fizzle guts, but then with Rainmaker on it. I like that it's gone silent right now. Come on, mate. Come back. No? Why has it stopped making sound? Jesus Christ. There we go. But the delay is going to give you the call and response. It just knits it together. And then you've got reverb, should you wish. I think you've got to have effects. The problem is a lot of the modular mixers that I've seen have only got 1 send, which is a real problem. I've been eyeballing that Bifaco DIY hex mix system, which has got 3 sends. It's big though, and I really want to try and keep to this sort of space. Anyway, let's sort of look at a high level. I've got some notes over here, which I'm going to refer to. Right, so again, practice is the most important thing. Practice leads to confidence. Practice made me confident that I could do this and not feel scared. And I just had a better time, had a really good time playing as a result. So if you have any fear about your impending gig, the only problem is you've just not practiced enough. So just play and play and play. And to reiterate the Stevie O thing, to bang on about it, his kind of, his suggestion is you've got to just simulate a gig and just stand and play for an hour, and you've got to not give yourself any outs. Don't stop ever. You've got to almost treat it like you are live, and then it will force you to learn those places you can go. And I think it is important that the modular be big enough that you've got lots of different things you can do. There'll be a tipping point where if you just don't simply have enough stuff in the case, be it percussion, bass lines, top lines, whatever those elements are that you've given yourself, you kind of do need a bare minimum of them. So maybe you should talk about a kind of like higher level what's going on here. The fundamental idea is based on that previous video, which was the idea of using the Metropolis as a core sequencer and then deriving 2 melody lines off of that one sequencer. What I mean is literally this. To start with, I've got the Platts and the fizzle guts. And my main sort of inspiration was the chord mode in Platts. Basically, what I did was I prototyped this on my large system where I was just playing around with different elements on a big modular where I can pull things out and mess around. And I know we don't all have that luxury, but the idea was to play, and by playing, discover, test a theory, which was this whole idea of simplifying the stevia process. And it definitely worked. So I was like, I'm going to implement this in a small case, because I know it will do the thing. And it was only through playing that I knew. And basically, Platt's here making a chord. And that chord is literally just the notes from Metropolis. And I can change those. And the gate that's opening the stages here is the Metropolis's gate. So really the Platt's is just being controlled by Metropolis. So both gates, I can turn all the gates off and it goes silent, or I can have one on. Or I can turn on loads of them. And I can just leave it open. And I've got the fizzle guts. Such a weird filter, really distorty. Can you hear as well how it does this kind of bleeping? You hear that? That's fizzle guts does this. It has this weird artifact, like this bleepy artifact. But you can change the tone and the chord. And you just add reverb to that, and it'll sound great. Kind of. Shorten it. And then we've got our bass, which is the Dixie and the Jove. More like this, actually. And so, both of those melody lines are coming from the Metropolis. So the Platt's is getting the exact same signals that the Dixie is getting, but the difference is that they're just having their gates triggered by different things. In the case of Platt's, the Dixie, sorry, it's from this channel on grids. And I'm actually running it through the Laddick skipper module as well, which allows you to skip gates. So I've got two different ways of making more infrequent like note patterns, and I think that's really key, is just having infrequent, don't do it too much, leave the space between the notes, because it's going to pick out different melodies as it goes. If I open these both up, you'll hear how they move together. And if I change, it's quite nice though. Shorten that. Turn up the notes. The trick is having an infrequent gate pattern. Because then you're just slicing out of that melody line at different times. And that scarcity, that sort of space, just, it keeps it fresh. And I think it allows you to listen to it for longer. And I mean, I'm using the TR8 here, and this has kind of been the big problem, is I would really like to have all the drums in the modular, but I don't have that yet, and that's because I've been ill. So the drum stuff I've really only just kind of got in, and I've got some of it here. And I've got a volume fader for the VIA. And basically these are being variously triggered by Euclidean circles in different ways. And I'm using the abstract data event boss. Um, I mean, at the moment, I don't think it's so relevant to talk about how it's wired up, but I want to explain what I want functionally to achieve, which is that I want to be able to do what Stevio does, which is use two very short sort of patterns, and then basically I just allow, from the use of logic modules, from the use of switching, allow those two patterns to intermingle and just find their way into the drum modules variously. I've got something here, interestingly, which I'm going to read to you from. So I've been messaging Stevio, and very nicely, as Stevio always does, he's responded. As a bit of an aside, Stevio is going to appear on the podcast. He agreed to, and I'm going to go to free rotation, which is going to be awesome. So I'm quite excited about that. Anyway, this is some stuff that Stevio wrote to me in response to my question. He's talking about, I asked him just like, how is this done? How are you doing the drums? So he says, where's the bit that was interesting? Okay, so the next bit gets complicated and I don't have time to explain it all here, but I use sequential switches and logic modules to create sub-rhythms and routings. I think I kind of explained this in a clumsy way in my demo video. Basically, there is no finite route. When I throw a switch in the sequencers, everything is fluid. That switch might clock some sequential switch or provide an input for it, and at the same time trigger a sound, and might also contribute to trigger an AND in combination with another trigger from somewhere else in a logic module, which may in turn trigger an envelope which controls one of the parameters in one of the fundamental sequences, or stop and start it, etc., etc. So it's a constant feedback loop sequencer, so it's a constant feedback loop and generative. It would take me all day to explain it properly, but I think of it like this. Start with really simple patterns and use the interaction of those patterns with logic and switching modules to create complex rhythms. Sometimes you go into a dead end and the sequence either stops altogether or loops out and nothing changes anymore. But I avoid this by having two sequencers in polymeters. It can still happen, but all you need to do is throw a trigger switch in the still running sequencer to get things happening again. But for live gigs, I always have another simple sequencer constantly running with triggers to start both if necessary if they lock up. Here's the key bit. To be honest, it rarely happens because I've been working with this system for 9 years now and I know it inside out. So that wasn't very helpful, was it? Bless him. That's the problem, is that it's a complex system, and I don't know if it can be done in a small amount of modules, as I just do not have a lot of space here. But the key idea is start with simple things, jumble them, and I feel there are ways. I've got a plug here. I've got this abstract data event boss. I have got a switch model, and I've got sequential switches. I think perhaps I need to take these out, put them in my other case, and just sort of pull them around for a while and experiment. Because I don't have an easy solution, and I just want a way that I can kind of do a few things, but if I'm busy working on the melodies, I want to know that the drums are evolving themselves in some way. I think that's a real challenge, especially in a small space. Now, as a word on the whole evolution thing, there is a module that I have here which I think is worth highlighting called the Triple Sloth. It's over here. It's just a white module with 3 LEDs and loads of outs. And basically, it's a it's a triple LFO that runs under its own brain. It has its own kind of mad steam. And I don't understand how it's deriving its voltages, and I don't think it's important to. The point is that it just creates very slow LFOs, and I variously got the Triple Sloth connected to loads of different things, including the sort of brightness control on rings, various other things, just modulating parameters for me so that it's almost like there is always a pair of hands slowly turning the dials. The other thing is that I have got a random voltage out of Pamela's new work controlling how much of the stages envelope I am sending to the fizzle guts to always vary it exactly as Ebsidic does, and he explains this in the podcast that I did with him, so that the volume of the filter is ever so slightly different with every step. I think that's really important, and I have another set of VCAs which I've not yet plumbed in, and I want to build more of that. I want all of the levels, especially, for example, the entire percussion lane here could be changing in time, but I think it might be important that it don't change in time. It don't change in time based on a random voltage. I would like it to change in volume based on a rhythmic voltage, because I think that's more important. I think it will lead to a better groove. So what I mean as in that there's just a rhythmic LFO that's constantly riding the volume of all of the percussion to some small extent, so that there's always like volume changes. It might also be the Z8000. I use a step sequence pattern here to always change the volume of the drums, creating the volume variation, the velocity change. It's really easy to forget about that. And it was what I talked about in that VCA video. But these are the automations that I have to build into this for it to always be interesting and for it to make it more manageable. But while I try and sort of build towards this goal of just making funky grooves that don't, that the vibe is not dropped on a dance floor. And I think what was the other part of that was shuffle. I've tried to sort of build some in. I think it needs to be more shuffled. That is a key. There's a really good interview that, if I remember, and remind me if I don't post this, and I'll post it. I've read a really, really good article on Attack, which was talking about swing, and it was Roger Lynn talking about the inventation of swing. And the quote that I loved was Roger Lynn saying how you should see the reactions in someone's face when I put swing, when you're just playing a drum pattern off a drum machine without swing, and then you fade it in. And watch, I've seen the reactions, the visceral reaction that it has on a person, and they smile when you do that. When shuffle comes in, they smile. I mean, that says everything. That's why shuffle's really important. And if you don't have shuffle in your modular, you're done fucked up. And it isn't really present at the moment. In fact, actually, also, because I'm slaving the TR8 to the Pamela's new workout, there is not shuffle. It doesn't seem to have shuffle in the TR8 when it's externally clocked. And that's a problem. It should do that. It needs to do that. Anyway. These melody lines, you can hear how they're responding to the same sequence. There is one extra jumbulation, which is the way that I've kind of expressed the Stevio thing in a slightly different way, is using the aux inputs on the Metropolis, because they allow you to do shifts, to add to the sequence in different ways. Two ways at the moment. One is with octave shifts, and the other is with semitone shifts in key. Why does this keep... It's weird when it keeps doing that. So if I turn up this, now this bottom lane of the Z8000 modulates the octave shifts, and I've just got a standard clock going in here. But I can slow it down with this clock divider, I believe. He says. Maybe it's just the top line that I can slow down. Or maybe it's just broken. God. Yeah, it's just the top one. So basically this is allowing me to create kind of 4-bar octave shifts. And then this top line is the sort of in-key modulator, which I can, he says, yeah, I can, move at different rates using this Laddick clockworks. And that's just fast cutting into the thing, changing at different rates. I think for a truly Stevio thing, I should be changing direction here. That's where I would like to use the clocks. Perhaps the clocks from the drums can interact with this Z8000 and be moving things back and forward depending on where clocks that are in turn firing the drums are working. That's basically what Stevio is talking about. Interconnecting those things so that one thing that I do here suddenly has an effect on lots of other things in lots of different ways. But fundamentally this works pretty well, and in the gig I'm kind of like, you sort of remember, oh yeah, I'll do an octave shift, that's been getting a bit boring, and you can almost do it like a performance effect. What's that weird sound? I don't know why it's doing that. Sounds strange. Anyway, so you kind of get the idea there. There are some other things. I mean, like, for example, I've got the clouds. If I fade out the drone, I've got clouds being triggered by marbles, the sort of drummy bit of marbles. And there's all the various modes, which are quite entertaining for different reasons.
Offer you more choices than that. Music
and if you move the density one way, and you get lots of overlap stuff, you get like kind of like weird, like distorted, swirly sound. But it's just there to just add some vocal interest. It's about having enough bits and bobs so that I'm like, I've got a bit of percussion, I've got some of this texture stuff. So I can have the drums going on here. Oh, the top clock divider here controls the overall rate of the drums. Sorry, I'm not explaining this very well. I'm not in my right sorts. So I've got some percussion, I've got the clouds, I've got the drone, should I want it. But then, on my Dixie Jove, flat, Urban Rainmaker, and then 808. Oh, and then there's a final thing. I've got a Chemy's Taiko, also being triggered by the marbles. Where is it? Should be. Oh, you can kind of hear it there again. Making these weird squidgy sounds. And I've got it being modulated by the sloth. So it will always be changing it in different ways. And then by the vocal mic itself. Woo. So yeah, that's kind of it. I mean, there's not a lot else. Obviously, there's the Urban, the Rainmaker. I should talk a bit about the tuning aspect. And the answer to that is really, I just, I didn't set a root note on this thing. I literally, just during practice, okay, let me actually just do it. So rather than just talking. So you note that I've taken the dials off the plats and the rings, and that's in order to fix the tuning and make it harder for me to knock it. I predetermined it, but as I say, I've not sort of got out a guitar tuner. I could do that, and I could make sure that what I would want to do is make sure that whatever voltage Metropolis is outputting corresponds to what voltage the plats and the Dixie are making. And that's going to be a tremendous advantage if I was actually to play along with it with something else, like a peak or something, which I have thought about, like clocking the key step to this and then playing along with it. But literally, it's a case of just opening it up. So I could tune it to something else, so like this. I've taken the dial off the Dixie as well. Is that right? Kind of. Sort of, kind of works. God, this is fun, isn't it? The kinds of things that really don't translate well into a video. Tuning your oscillators. But it is important. But as you can sort of hear and see, what I'm doing is literally just doing it kind of freely. And in a way, obviously there's a key that you can choose in the Metropolis. If I go onto the menu here, scale, there are scales. There was no grand design here except to use the scale and just kind of listen. Phrygian, there's a root note, and just it came through playing. I just had a kind of a combo of tuned oscillators and a scale in the Metropolis that I liked, and I just left the tuning where it was. There was no design to it other than that. It's a little harder with the Platts when it's making a chord. It's perhaps better to put it on like one of these other modes. That's a weird sounding one. Not a weird sounding one, but like a single voice one. Sorry, single oscillator one. So then, if I blend in the other... Like there, for example, they're in... Now they're perfectly in tune with each other. So you know then if you close them down, like that, and then that, just to be clear, that literally is the science involved here, for my part anyway. And then if I come and change the scale on here, and then what I'm doing then, when I'm actually performing, is simply just listening and reacting and just thinking, oh, that'll sound nice with a little bit of delay on that high bit. And then, sorry, this is all very long-winded. During the performance, the bit of advice that I can give you, certainly what I was consciously thinking was to do this and to literally just react and just be like, that'll sound good with some drums, and I'll fade down the hats and everything else. So I just start with a kick drum. So I'm just like, yeah, cool, that's just like a foundational groove, and I've still got all the hats to fade in as an effect, because it's really nice to just build it up bit by bit. And this is sort of the thing. One of the problems of modular is that, and I've talked about this with Ebsidic, but it's certainly true, it's really hard to make fast changes. You can't do drops on a modular, really. If you learn how to do that, let me know. Switch multiples are a big help, because if you're using those to create, to send clocks that create events, suddenly by switching all the switch multiples, you can make a lot of things happen in a quick succession. But it is problematic. It's really hard. There's so many controls, and I've only got one pair of hands, and therefore, yeah, I just can't make loads of things happen at once. Therefore, the way that you actually interact with this thing is gradual. You have to gradually introduce elements one at a time, because you simply don't have another way of doing it. And so what I would advise you, and what I'm consciously thinking about, what I was thinking about during that gig, and as I've been practicing, I've been realizing how it makes sense to do this, and this is what you should do. Move slowly. Just allow it time to breathe, because frankly you don't have a choice. There's no other way that you can do this, I think, unless you have some very clever switching. So you've just got to embrace the slowness and slow evolution of things, and building up a groove just bit by bit with other elements, and then just playing some effects just to keep it interesting. And then obviously also having a mind to what elements have been going on too long. That's really the challenge. So whilst there is a part of your brain that will be thinking about what to do next, there's got to be a part of you that's just listening properly like an audience member, so that I know that those hats have really been dragging, and I fade them out. And then the real, I guess what that's another way of saying, what's really nice, I think, during a gig is contrast. If you've been doing lots of one thing, do lots of the other thing. If you've been having lots of hats, strip it back. And then, especially if that's been going on, it's then really nice to take that element out. I've just had loads of hats and percussion, all this bright stuff going on. I'll just fade it out. And I'll slowly reintroduce it again. And it doesn't need to be more than that. Like, that can be more than enough to entertain an audience, quite frankly. And then it's about changing all the elements, but being mindful of contrast. What have you been doing lots of? That's what was nice about the rings, was just thinking, if I slowly fade this out, and it's nicer to fade it than I can sort of bring this in. Now that is out of tune. I'm not sure if that's in either. But, you know, fade out these other elements. And I faded in the rings, and everyone's kind of stood on the dance floor. I'll add loads of effects to it. And then I'll reset Metropolis while I'm doing it. And then I'll fade up I'll take down the kick drum, I'll fade up just the hats on the TR8, and I'll fade in the hats. And then I'm going to turn up, with everything zeroed on Metropolis, turn up the octave shift input, so I'll be getting a 4-step sequence. And then I might fade in the Dixie and Jove with an infrequent note amount. It's not making a sound. Oh, there you go. Cymbals. I'll fade out the other hi-hat. But I've just dropped it down. I shouldn't really have done that. That's the other benefit of moving slowly, is that if you sort of start doing something and you think, actually I should just leave that where it is, you've got time to stop yourself from doing it. Because actually, I just want it. Yeah, I think it is just having just enough of everything really. A bass line, some kind of top line, a bunch of percussion, and the TR8's not necessary, but it's certainly working. Yeah, I don't know. Like I say, I'm still like hung up on the whole idea of the danceable thing, but it's just making a really nice groovy kind of sound. I think it's a nice collection of parts. And as you've seen, it certainly wasn't the first version of a live system that I've created. I've had lots of iterations. I've had different bits and bobs in them, but there's certain things that you sort of during all those journeys you pick things up. Like the Joe filter is great, and the Dixie is small and great. I've added the warps, which is giving me like this sort of weird extra voice. So I've got mixers, so I can have the core Dixie tones or the warped version, which is like a wave folded version, and I'm modulating that with this sloth. And so I've got like extra tones that I can bring in. It's not very easy to get to that. It doesn't work that well. But hopefully that gives you a feel for what's available in here, which is to say not much. But again, if I haven't said it enough already, because I've said it multiple times, what made it work was practice. Practice told me that I knew that I would be able to play something cool because I'd learned the tricks of this system. And obviously there's a ton more to discover. The more you do that, the more tricks you learn, the more confident you will be. That's painfully obvious. Practice makes perfect. I didn't just bloody make that up. But it's true. It really does actually make perfect, especially when you're designing your own system because you have to be the master of it. And the bottom line is it'll just make you feel better, I think. You'll just have a better time and you'll make better music and everything will be better. So I hope that might, I don't know, that possibly doesn't help, especially, but this is kind of an interim video in that sense. What I will do is I will revisit this when I've made those developments, and I will talk to you about how I've tried to solve some of these problems, especially the ones for percussion. That's the biggest challenge. I need a system where the drums kind of take care of themselves more. One of the things that I wanted to do, which I've not done, is load these Tip Top The One samplers with my own samples. I want my own. I'm using the cards that they come with, and you'll recognize all the sounds. If you've got one of those, they're boring. Well, they're not boring. They're great. But they're a particular sound. I want one to be full of kick drums. I want one to be full of snares and percussion sounds, bongos, tablas, maraca sounds of different types. More the hit sounds. And then I want the third one to be full of hi-hatty type things. So 808, 909, different hats. And then Basimilus to do lots of other things. I'm tempted to try and shoehorn the 808 hats in here in some way, because I think one element that I recognised that was really successful about my old system was just having the ability to just kind of turn the dial on branches and just have loads of hats happen, because that's just a really nice way of adding energy at peak moment when you're like, fuck, this is sounding so good. And if I just had like slow fast hats, it will just add that level of moreness that you need. In the same way that adding a clap, like just a steady clap is the moreness. If you've been listening to a kick drum with snares, add clap and you suddenly, it just brings it up a level. So it's kind of those things. You've just got to have them, and you'll know when you've got enough of them because you'll have practiced, and you'll be like, oh yeah, when I bring in, I know to leave the clap out because I'll always have it there, as the sort of the howitzer in your arsenal to bring out when the moment feels right. You'll fade it in, and it'll just be, oh my god. So yeah, that's kind of an extremely rambly tour of my system. Let me just look at my notes, because I wanted to check that I've covered everything about it. I think I did talk about everything. I did. Practice is key. Practice, practice, practice. So, happy practicing, my friend. I'll speak soon.